it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Something of a return to my roots here tonight on the channel. When I first started out on YouTube, my intention was to do weird, wonderful stories that would make you think, what on earth have I just listened to, in the manner of The Twilight Zone. Now, of course, I've drifted away from that quite a lot since I started out, so what better time to make a return than on my 5th anniversary here. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, 5 years on YouTube as of this week. Well, you know what to do, don't you? Here we go then. Corpse to the power. Now, a few things are slightly amiss here. To clarify, I died just a few decades back. Now, honestly, and it might strike you as hard to believe, this is very easy to come to terms with. All things die, obviously, and all things that don't die are forgotten by the things that do. Even things you might argue are supposed to go on forever, like mountains or time itself, will eventually come either to some kind of holy apocalypse, or more pessimistically, the heat death of the entire universe, fade into the endless beyond. Of course I was, at first, terrified by the afterlife, and I lamented over my lost opportunities, my short life. You know, that whole 5 stages routine. But after a short while, I've become rather adjusted to the ghost lifestyle. Honestly, the thing that's difficult to grasp isn't the fact that I died. The thing that's difficult to grasp is that, after I died, I think I must have died a second time, if that even makes any sense. See, I'd been exploring a very old, very decrepit home, as spirits tend to do, and it had really quite a beautiful aura. Lots of garish paintings, cobwebs practically all over the place, torn up couches, walls weathered to time. Honestly, it was the most fine place I'd discovered so far. Unfortunately, that was around when I discovered another ghost, who was already haunting the premises. Now, this put a bit of a damper on my day, since, aside from the rather unexpected company, this house seemed like the exact kind of place for a sorry old phantom like myself to reside in. Although I now became the slightest bit worried that this other ghost had already laid a claim upon the home. I approached the other spectre, a rather unsightly-looking man with a beard and a trucker's cap, with only the best of intentions, to ask him, quite frankly, whether this was his haunt, or if he was just passing through. As I hovered in his direction, however, he jolted up from the wall and glared wildly at me. He seemed upset, but before I could lay down some explanation to reassure my compatriot, he pulled out a small handgun and shot me. I collapsed onto the floor, writhing and bleeding in visible ghost blood, practically choking on my own non-corporeal darn ghost throat, trying to scream strange and inaudible ghost curses at my sudden assailant. Then, just as swift as my spirit died against the hardwood floor, the me I am now rose out of its shell and stared down upon itself. The corpse of my previously eternal ghost body lay stricken on the floor, as I, the ghost of a ghost, hovered beguiled above it. And this just happens to be where I am right now, and this event has, understandably, sparked some kind of existential crisis within me. And, stupid as I happen to be, I'm so dumbfounded and absolutely smitten by what, from every sense and angle, appears to be the very dead body of a ghost, that I'm promptly shot yet again by what must surely be the ghost of some idiotic and insane maniac with a taste for firearms. As I yet again rose from my ghost corpse, squared, another puzzling dilemma fluttered weakly into my mind. As I've surely been struck before by vehicles and other forms of deadly or dangerous implements as a ghost, how now was that blasted gun in the hands of my bewildered housemate able to murder me with only a simple bullet? The answer, and I do admit this answer fills me with absolute dread and a certain sense of cold bemusement, is that the very gun he has fired upon me with, not once but twice now, is not in fact a physical gun one might purchase at some local and very much mortal gun shop. It surely has to be the ghost of a gun, held in the hands of the ghost of a gun wielder. Now this raises all manner of questions, many of which I don't feel liable to ask. nor do I suppose I'd have the answers to. But mainly, how on earth does a physical and, by all previous expectations, non-sentient object manage to, upon being somehow killed, release a ghost of itself into the world of the dead? Now, yet again, completely thick as I am, I swear I never do learn, I let that other ghost with the itchy trigger finger fire upon me yet again. Meanwhile, I had been completely lost in thought, contemplating the very reality I thought I knew. At this point, with a veritable dog pile of my ghost's corpses strewn across each other on the hardwood floor, I finally lose my temper. "Just what do you think you're doing?" I exclaimed to the other ghost, who lets up for a moment and gives off just the slightest look of exasperation. Quite a pitiful look, in all honesty. Before I might reconsider my tone, however, he goes and shoots me yet again, square in the stomach, then flips back up into my head. "This is where I draw the line," I proclaim groggily, rising as yet another spirit, looking again at the pile of dead me's on the floor. Streaming mad, I begin to march over to the man, or at least hover in a way mostly evocative of such a march, the sort of march you might do to intimidate a misbehaving dog, or frighten away a bird on the street, and strike him across the face with the back of my hand. He lets out the most miserable cry and drops the gun across the floor. "Now what'd you go ahead and do that for?" I speak up to him, barely letting up my manner of speaking. Just like a child might ignore a parent, he simply stares dumbfoundedly at the gun on the floor. After a moment or two, he finally takes a step forward and tries to get at it, though I react rather quickly and pin him to the wall. "I meant to ask you what you shot me for," I proclaim, half nonsensically. Finally turning his eyes up to me, he lets out a slow sound, like a hollow moan, and then begins to nearly cry. "I just don't understand," he exclaims, only barely understandable. "I shot you so many times. Why, I even shot myself so many times. But so far, every dang soul I try to kill only comes back again as a ghost." He holds up his hands in the weak symbol of a finger pistol. How do you suppose that makes any sense? Well, presently I'm astonished by what he says. I push him back into the wall and step away. Unfortunately for me, though, he slides through the wall gracefully, for he is a phantom. Now realizing that I'd tangled with the ghost of a murderer, I turn over to grab his spiritual pistol, only to find that it too died upon landing on the floor, and now is side by side with its own ghost. I shudder at the sight. "49, 50. The huge screen flashed into life. Simon stared wide-eyed and open-mouthed as the number 22 glowed in huge red digital figures. He tried to find some meaning to the numbers, each about a meter high in the center of the black panel. It was suspended from 2 chains, hanging from the high, dull ceiling and taking up most of the wall space. Simon couldn't move. He was strapped into a metal chair, restraints around his wrists and ankles. His legs tingled as the seat cut into the back of his knees, restricting the blood supply. The back of the chair was high and stopped him looking around. He couldn't make any sense of the number, continuing to stare at it, transfixed. They'd taken him during the night. The breaking down of the door, the shouts of the men and the screams of his family seemed to be nothing more than a blur, a bad dream. He'd woken strapped to the chair in a cold, still silence. Simon knew that there was only one reason why he'd been brought here. It was because of the articles. Throughout university, Simon had spent his spare time searching for secret government documents online, hunting for any signs of scandal, and posting his controversial findings online. He always knew it was only time before they found him. The screen changed to 23. "What is this?" murmured Simon, scanning his eyes over the huge numbers once more. He'd originally thought they must have been counting down to something, but no. Simon pondered again. I haven't been here 23 hours, have I? He doubted it. Soon the number became 24, and then 25, and 26. What's going on? Yelled Simon in frustration as fear and confusion left him trembling in the chair. Behind him, something crackled. The temperature is now 26 degrees Celsius, said the voice of an old man through the speaker. Simon watched in horror as the figure before him became 27. They're going to burn me alive, Simon realized. They're going to keep raising the temperature until I die. He panicked, trying to break out of his restraints. His struggling triggered numbers to rise more rapidly, increasingly steadily at intervals of less than 20 seconds. When it hit 38, Simon stopped, giving up, panting heavily as beads of sweat trickled from his forehead to his chin and onto his shirt. His breathing was labored as he shouted for help, questioning the anonymous voice that had spoken to him. There was nothing. The figure continued to rise to 45 as Simon watched, still weakly trying to pull against the tight binds which dug into his flesh. "Help me, please," he begged, his shirt damp with sweat and his short, dark fringe plastered to his skin. He kicked and struggled, grunting and straining as he closed his eyes to block out the numbers. "Prisoner," said the voice, and Simon froze as he opened his eyes slowly. The giant red 49 filled his vision. "You are only sweating because you're struggling. This room is not 49 degrees. Simon calmed, his fears subsiding a little. The voice was right. As he was still, the sweat began to dry and cool him down. He almost breathed a sigh of relief. "It is the room in front of you which is 49 degrees. There was a mechanical whirring from above as the number 50 appeared and the screen began to rise slowly, hoisted by its chains. 51, 52, 53, 54. The figures were rising faster than before, almost a blur. "That is the room where your wife and children sit in chairs like you." As the screen rose higher, it began to reveal a huge glass panel. If somebody offers you Cloud 9, do not take it. "I don't give a damn where you go. Just get the hell out." A powerful voice boomed from the doorway, and several random objects flew through the air, missing Alex as he stormed off down the driveway. Father had always been a raging alcoholic, and had a habit of throwing tantrums, but this one was the worst yet. Alex had failed history 3 grading periods in a row, breaking his promise to at least pass his classes. "It's not my fault. Mr. Thomas is the most boring and confusing teacher ever," Alex muttered under his breath as he pulled on his hood, fighting off the chill of the mid-November air. Pulling out his phone, the steaming teen dialed up his good friend, Red. "Yo, dude, I need a place to crash for the weekend. My parents kicked me out again." Alex sighed into the phone. "No problem, bro. I've got you covered," his friend replied on the other end. "Just come on over to my place. My mom's gone on another week-long bender, so she won't be home to care." Alex could always rely on Red, ever since they'd been 9 years old. Coming from similarly broken homes, Red and Alex had a mutual understanding of each other, finding comfort in each other's company, along with many mind-altering substances that they could get their hands on. By the time Alex arrived at Red's beaten-up shack of a house, Red had already invited other guests. Upon opening the door, Alex saw who'd shown up. Before him, Red, the short and lanky ginger, with skin as pale as paper, smiling widely, showing off the gaps in his teeth from one too many fistfights. Inside the house, Alex spotted Eric, a massive, stout, 18-year-old who was like the older brother of the whole group. His beard had grown in when he was 12, so Eric had always looked like a huge mountain of a man. Lastly, but certainly not least, there was Patricia, or Paddy, as Alex called her. Paddy was Eric's little sister, 2 years younger, and while he didn't enjoy what she did in her spare time, he did want to keep her safe, since she had a bad habit of catching the attention of thug types. While younger than the rest of the group, Paddy stood a good 6 inches taller than Alex, but she never wasted time rubbing that in his face. "Hey, shorty, glad you could make it to the party. Red's got some good shit for us tonight," chimed Paddy as she sat on the stained couch, sipping from a flask. Smiling softly, Alex stepped in as Red closed the door behind him. "The lady speaks the truth, my good man. I have procured a new brand of substance from yonder pipe shop. Behold." Red held out several packets, all labeled the same. C9. Cotton candy clouds. Just read the packaging. Depicts what would look to be clouds made of cotton candy, as the name suggests. C9. What on earth is that? Alex inquired, just as Paddy draped her arms over his shoulders. C9 is the newest and hottest thing on the block, Daddy-O. One puff of this, and you'll be as high as the peak of Mount Everest, Red replies, while giving Alex the finger guns, changing his mannerisms as per usual. "It's a synthetic, supposed to mimic the effects of pot, but it's crazy cheap," Paddy added, and Red nodded in agreement, tossing the packages to Eric, who sat in the oversized recliner, which still looked small compared to him. "Eric, my man, do me the honors and stuff those pipes for me," Red chimed, as he struck an overly dramatic pose. Eric grimaced, signing to Red that he was tired of him bringing in new things around his sister. "Chill, bro. It's totally safe. It wouldn't be legal if it was dangerous, right?" Patty retorted, with a chuckle, drawing a sigh of defeat from Eric. He just couldn't say no to his little sister. While Eric started stuffing the pipes with what looked like sawdust, Paddy pulled Alex to the couch and pushed him down, sitting next to him, but clutching his arm. "Tonight, my friends, we explore new territories," announced the overly zealous Red, as he took a stuffed pipe, wasting no time in lighting it up and puffing hard. The foul stench of burnt cotton candy filled the air, making Alex's nose scrunch up. Receiving his own, Alex placed the pipe in his mouth, and Paddy lit it for him, and he inhaled. Burning smoke filled his lungs, scorching everything it touched all the way down, eliciting violent coughs from Alex. Drinking water to expel the horrendous taste from his mouth, Alex watched as Paddy and Eric joined in, taking puffs of their own. For several minutes, the group felt nothing, taking repeated puffs on the pipes in hopes of speeding up the process. Red, I thought you said this was good shit," Alex scoffed, dumping out the ashes from his chili pepper-shaped pipe. "Shit, man. I was told this was the hottest shit in town right now. Maybe we just can't feel it since." Alex looked up at Red, expecting him to finish his sentence, but all Alex could see on his friend's face was nothing. It wasn't that he was expressionless, just that, well, he had no face. Blinking rapidly, Alex realized Red still had facial features, but they were blurred out, as if he was in one of those police shows where witnesses wanted to keep their identities concealed. Alex couldn't remember Red's face now for the life of him. Looking around, he realized that the same thing was happening with Patty and Eric. A numbness overtook Alex. He neither felt nor heard anything, aside from a steady and rapid thumping from his chest, like a muffled drum. Soon after, his vision started to fade to blackness. It was a warm and comforting darkness, like when one falls asleep. But the tranquil feeling of security was quickly lost, as Alex realized he was back home, staring into the scarred door to the hallway closet. A sturdy-looking board leaned against the doorframe, looking to fit in metal hooks screwed into the wall on either side of the door. Dread overtook the boy as he felt an imposing force behind him, pushing him backwards towards the slowly opening closet.
"I told you, boy. You mouth after me again, and I'd put you in the hole. Consider yourself lucky."
A deep, rumbling voice bellowed from the force pushing him through the doorway. Panic set in as he struggled against the force, but much like an animal fighting against the current of a river, his efforts were in vain. Behind him, the door swung shut, and the loud thud of wood hitting metal rang out, casting Alex into silence and darkness. Pounding on the door, Alex cried out in fear, begging for freedom, but the old-world wooden door held fast, not relenting to the boy's feeble attempts to break it down. Alex screamed until his voice went hoarse, and then all he could produce was a pathetic squeak. Within the closet, which acted as Alex's prison, there was no sign of light. A darkness as thick as pitch enveloped the terrified boy. Hours upon hours of solitude in the endless void of shadow had taken its toll on him, scrambling his sense of time and reality. Just as countless memories of days spent in the prison of the closet flooded Alex's mind, suddenly the imposing, claustrophobic grip on him was gone. Quickly, he got to his feet, scanning his surroundings. Much like in the closet, Alex stood in a smothering darkness, that is, until he turned to see the azure glow of a fountain. An oddly out-of-place fixture in the dark, it stood tall and proud. Many gargoyles spewed glowing water from their mouths, but made no splashing of water on water. Atop the granite fountain stood a figure, human in shape, but completely void of any features. No hair, clothes, nose, ears, not even any eyes. Just a wide grin, a row of bleached and jagged teeth splitting open the tightly pulled onyx-colored skin on the face, an expression far too wide to be anywhere near human. In the faint glow of the luminous water, Alex could see the skin of the being's forehead split open with a sickening tear, putrid grey fluid leaking from the newly formed wound. Splitting further open, the break in skin revealed an inhumanly large eyeball, the size of a baseball, glaring back at Alex. Before any words could be spoken, the solid footing under Alex gave way, plunging him into murky water, forcing him to hold his breath. Coldness gripped Alex as he heard faint voices, though he couldn't make out what was said. Somehow, the voices seemed oddly familiar. Several hands pushed against his face and chest, growing more frantic as time went on. Alex couldn't move to fend off the groping hands. They felt like they were gripping every part of him. A burning sensation grew in his chest as his lungs ached for air. Voices grew frantic and jumbled, like a crowd of people yelling over each other. Suddenly, the hands grabbed him all over, and Alex felt them pulling him through the water quickly. An overpowering force slammed him on his back at the bottom of whatever body of water he was getting dragged through. As quickly as it all began, the water vanished, and Alex took in a breath of stale, musty air. Looking up, he saw ceiling tiles and felt the cold, hard tile of the school hall floor. Many students were muttering to each other in tongues Alex had never heard before. Having pulled himself to his feet, he swung his head around to see all the students staring at him, their gazes piercing straight through him. The stares surrounded Alex. He could feel himself getting impaled by judgment as the muttering rose in volume. Through the cacophony of noise, Alex could make out one word. Face. His hands immediately shot up to his face. and he felt something like slime, with bits of something floating in the ooze. With haste, Alex bolted to the restroom, which was, luckily, unoccupied, and once inside, he flipped on the light. Horror struck Alex as he finally saw what all the other students were talking about. His face was melting, much like a candle in front of a blowtorch. His skin turned a sickly grey and began to peel off his face. His nose dangled from a thread of muscle as a rancid odour filled his open nasal cavity. Though Alex watched in horror, he felt no pain. The decaying flesh of his face felt alien and wrong. Fingers dug into flesh and tore it away in a frenzy. Globs of decaying skin and muscle covered the porcelain sink in a grey fluid. His heart pounded painfully hard as he frantically clawed at his face, the same grey fluid oozing from between the muscle fibres and dripping onto the sink. Vision in his left eye faded as the eyeball melted into a jelly, slipping from its socket and into the sink. Nails scraped against bone as the last remaining shreds of flesh melted away. Using his index finger, Alex pried out his right eye, and, with an audible pop, the eyeball was ejected from its home and fell down the drain. Alex's vision followed the eyeball down the drain into complete darkness. Then, once again, Alex stood before the fountain. The ominous figure was still standing motionless atop it. His hands frantically groped his face as an inspection, finding his features to be untouched, as normal as usual. Returning his gaze to the ebony figure, Alex saw that several more wounds had torn their way through this being's skin, revealing piercing eyes all over the body. From the head to the legs, no part of the figure's body was left untouched by the multiplying eye. A hole opened up under Alex, and he fell, landing hard on his back in a heap. Dazed, Alex looked around him and felt something familiar. Grain. All around him, grain. Realization hit him, and Alex knew he was inside a grain silo. One summer, when he was 6, he had played with his cousins on his uncle's farm. While playing, Alex had climbed on top of the silo, trying to hide from his cousin by jumping into the grain. What he hadn't realized was that grain can act like quicksand, and it engulfed him rapidly. Alex kicked and screamed as he sunk deeper into the dry grain. He heard his cousin's voice calling to him from atop of the silo. Each kernel of grain put a tiny amount of pressure on Alex, each trying to push him down. Altogether, they forced the boy deeper. Having flailed his arms, Alex tried as hard as he could to free himself from the impending prison, only succeeding in burying himself deeper. Taking a final breath, Alex's head plunged underneath the grain. Now the grain faded away to soil, and Alex's eyes snapped open, only for him to be blinded by freshly disturbed dirt. Clarity hit him as he clamped his eyes shut, trying to wipe his eyes, but his hands were held in place by the earth around him. His lungs began to burn for air. Each attempt to draw in breath was met with more dirt. A chorus of voices screamed at him to escape, to go up. With burning muscles, Alex fought to lift his arms. Though it took all his effort, he managed to shift through the loose soil. Next came his legs, the dirt proving a formidable foe to overcome. Slowly worming his way up, Alex could feel the surface just out of reach. And then, once again, Alex stood before the fountain, but with eyes of various sizes surrounding him on all sides in the darkness. The fountain ran grey with the same putrid fluid pouring from the black figure that was now perched atop the highest gargoyle. All the statues in the fountain turned their heads in unison and stared directly at Alex, all yelling in alien tongues.
A deafening cacophony of screams barreled into Alex, forcing him to clamp his hands over his ears. The floating eyes glowed red with hatred as the grin on the black figure grew wider and wider, splitting what remained of its face until the bottom jaw flopped open, revealing thousands of rows of undulating, razor-sharp fangs extending all the way down the abyss that was its throat. Alex sat up in bed and screamed, flailing his arms in a cold sweat. "Whoa, come down there, buddy." A familiar voice sounded, and a door opened. Alex stopped and saw that he was in Red's room, lying in his bed. Turning, Alex saw that his best friend was standing at the door with a steaming bowl of what Alex presumed to be soup. "You all right, buddy?" Red inquired, walking over to Alex and sitting on the bed. You scared the shit out of all of us, man. You completely passed out." Alex rubbed his eyes as the haze started to lift from his mind. He suddenly recalled that the night before he and his friends had tried that new C9 crap. "Bro, I think you need to sober up a while. That fucked you up. You've been out for 2 days," Red added, as he looked deep into Alex's eyes, checking to make sure his friend was all right. A rumbling sound came from Alex's stomach, malnutrition setting in. "Yeah, I knew you'd be hungry by the time you woke up, so, I made you some soup," Red said with a smile, as he handed Alex the bowl. A wave of relief swept over Alex as he took everything in. He was out of that hell, done with that trip. Maybe he should take Red's advice and sober up for a while. Could do him some good. Alex had thought this as he brought the spoon into his mouth, then immediately spat it out. Dirt. Alex was eating dirt. The once mouth-watering scent of soup was replaced with the musty scent of soil. Alex blinked, and he was instantly back in the darkness, gasping for air only for his nostrils to be filled with more loose soil. He had never left his hole in the ground. He'd imagined all of the events in his friend's room. His lungs burned for air, and his muscles ached from lack of oxygen. Panic set in as Alex flailed in the dirt, digging his way up once more as his mind swam. Visions of moments flashed before his eyes. The long nights spent in the hole, the beatings his father never spared him from, the apathetic looks his mother gave him, that time he sewed his pants in class by accident, walking down dark alleyways at night with homeless man following him. These, and many more, flooded Alex's mind as he fought for survival. He felt the cold evening air on his hand as he broke to the surface, gripping stable ground as he pulled with all his might. His muscles began to fail him, deprived of oxygen and overtaxed from the effort. All thoughts slowed to a crawl as a biting cold slowly enveloped Alex, drawing him deeper into a sleep he couldn't fight any more. The sound of birds chirping stirred Alex awake. His eyes fluttered open as golden sunlight poured through his window and into his room. Sitting up quickly, Alex felt around, feeling the clean linens of his bed. Was he out? For good? Was this yet another dream, just a figment of his imagination? Well, it felt real enough, though, so that was good enough for now. Alex spent the next half hour collecting his thoughts, remembering the events of the previous night in vague detail. He honestly couldn't tell whether or not what he went through was an hallucination or a dream. After dressing himself and grabbing his phone, Alex noticed he had a message from Red. "Hey, hope you made it home all right. Gee, last night was nuts, bro. Be sure to come round and grab your hat." With a sigh, Alex set out towards Red's house once again. Arriving at the shack and having knocked on the door, Alex realized that Red wasn't home. Using the spare key under a rock near the door, Alex let himself in. The place was trashed, even more so than usual. Broken glass and candy wrappers laid scattered all over the floor, painting an odd picture of what had occurred the night before. Spotting his hat on the couch, Alex walked over and picked it up. And then he stopped, frozen in place. Slowly turning his head, Alex looked out the back sliding glass door, noticing a large hole in the backyard, complete with scattered and freshly dug dirt. Alex's heart sank. That hole hadn't been there the day before.
The dead planet. Humanity had depleted 99% of Earth's resources. The virus and the nukes in World War III had killed most of humankind. Only a happy select few were chosen to live in the city under the dome. Utopia. I was, of course, one of the happy few. We'd been looking for the longest time for a planet we could travel to with our advanced space technology, and finally we'd found it. A lush green planet we called Eden. Yes, it's a bit biblical and on the nose, but who are you to judge? It really was the perfect name for the perfect planet, complete with a rich ecosystem of alien life forms that thrived in their natural habitats with no humans to kill them off. Of course, only one family member of select families could enter the lottery for a chance to go to Eden. Luckily, my family was chosen, and they in turn chose me. I was genetically engineered to be the perfect man in every way, so it was only natural that I joined the lottery. Of course, I won. I'd always been lucky. I didn't have to fight in the duels, risking my life for the place on the ship either. So here I was laying in bed with a hot blonde. Unfortunately, her twin sister could not join. She was stuck on Earth. Only one space traveler per family. Unfortunate, but not as unfortunate as the poor son of a bitch losing the duel. Me and my girl for the night laughed when his brains were smashed in. And we travelled through hyperspace, and after a few months of travelling, we could finally see it. Good. I'd run through all the girls on this ship. Maybe Eden and its gardens would hold some sexy space aliens for me. Maybe it was a planet of only girls and needed a man to repopulate. These thoughts ran through my dirty mind as we approached our destination. Eden. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. More beautiful than any of the women I'd conquered. More beautiful than my own perfectly engineered reflection in the mirror. This planet was lush and green, full of life, unlike the brown and rotten Earth we'd left for future generations. Oh well, I guess they were fucked back home. But who gives a damn, really? Not me, that's who. Always looking out for number one, and number one is me, of course. The planet's gravitational pull started to pull our ship towards it, and fast. People started to look around in panic, stressed out and frightened. And then I saw it. The planet seemed to be moving. The oceans turned into baby blue eyes. Its biggest mountain was really its nose. It opened its dreadful mouth, full of razor-sharp teeth the size of the great Himalayan mountains on Earth. We'd left a dead planet behind us, looking for a planet with life. And we'd found one that was alive. The children knew. I woke up easy that day. As soon as my mum yelled up from the stairs, I was up. I got my clothes, showered, and did my daily morning routine that day. I headed downstairs into the kitchen, where my two sisters and little brother were eating breakfast. They looked at me with the same emotionless gaze as mine, and I nodded as if answering, although they already knew. They'd had the dream too. My mum asked us why we were being so quiet, but we just shook our heads. Later we started driving to school. Our mother commented on the 3 pale yellow holes in the sky. They'd been there for weeks, They'd appeared overnight. They could be seen over the entire planet. Everyone had their theories on what they were. Some thought they were a sign from God. Some thought a hole in the ozone layer. Well, they may have been right, but no one knew. But the children knew what it did. It caused the end. As we drove, we saw children and teenagers, all with the same emotionless gaze as us. They all had the dream too. They all knew. I reached school first, as mine was the first stop. I walked from the car and waved at them as they drove off. This would be the last time I would see them. I headed up the path to the yard of the school, waiting to go in. The normally semi-loud schoolyard was dead quiet. It was cold, but none of us cared. No one said a word, as none needed to be said. We all knew what each of us were thinking. As a matter of fact, we knew what every child under 17 was thinking that day. But one part of our mind hadn't been corrupted yet, and let us have the dream. We didn't tell anyone, not our parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, or anyone older than 17. Only we, the children, knew. It was time to go in, and we did just that. We entered in orderly lines. The first time in, well, never really. Our teachers stared in amazement as we quietly entered our classrooms and took our seats. We did our work as we were told, though there wasn't really any point to it. It wouldn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered. At 11:45 a.m., every student looked at one another. We all nodded in silent agreement, and despite the protest of our teachers, marched out of the school in unison and into the yard. We stood in silence, looking up at the sky. Nothing had changed yet, but soon. Some who cared about each other had hugged, and those who loved each other, or if someone had a crush on someone, kissed. To my surprise, I was kissed. Didn't know her name, and I don't think I'd ever seen her before. She put on a small, sad smile, and she held both of my hands. I put on the same smile, and all of us looked up in near unison at the sky. The 3 yellow holes blazed. A white light erupted from the center, and soon everything went white. The shrieks of the adults could be heard, but not children. The children weren't scared. The children knew. More goes on in my cat's head. I got my cat Roach 10 years ago, just before my 16th birthday. He was 3 months old at the time, a small kitten with a furry tabby coat and eyes similar to those of a Persian. According to the lady who owned his mother, the tabby coat is a rarity among the breeds of his parents. His mother was a blue British and his father a chinchilla longhair, an unrecognized breed in many places. Like his mother, Roach is a coward. The moment he saw me coming into the apartment he was born in, both him and his mother ran under a couch. It took us a while to get them out, and he took a few days to acclimate to his new home. He was named Roach because he ran away from everything and everyone, hiding somewhere like a cockroach. Over the next 10 years, Roach was a decent enough house cat. Being more feral, as my relatives described him, he was suspicious of strangers. His long and luscious fur had always been a pain in the ass, but it was worth it. I thought I'd lost him about 5 years ago when he found a way to travel from one bedroom to the kitchen somehow. Cats are a secretive animal, so he must have found a way. 4 years ago I got him my dog, Jessica. She immediately fell in love with him, but the bastard, being a bastard, he didn't take to her. At first he was afraid of her and thus aggressive whenever she started playing, and eventually he started warming up to her, although he still refuses to outright engage with her in full-on play. She's a giant compared to him. After I got Jess, he started warming up to his human owners too, actively seeking attention, which he hadn't up to this point. While he was still a thorny, fur-shedding monster that acted like a grumpy old man as the years rolled on, his open displays of affection were a nice gesture of gratitude. A month ago I moved to a new apartment, and obviously Roach had to freak out and disappear somewhere after being led into the new place. Looked around for him but couldn't find a trace. Asking Jess to sniff him out yielded no results. At first she seemed enthusiastic about finding her mate, but she stopped reacting with excitement to his name when I asked her to sniff him out. During my third night in the new place, I heard a scraping noise behind the washing machine. I figured it must be Roach hiding behind it, as there was a sizable space into which the machine fit under the kitchen sink. I moved the machine away and looked into the space under the sink. Nothing. Not a trace of the bastard feline. Well, trusting my gut feeling, I grabbed a flashlight and shone into the darkness. Lo and behold, Roach sat there, in the distance, compressing his body as tightly as he could sit. His eyes were wide with horror. The stress had driven him to hide away from prying human eyes. Well, he didn't expect his entryway into this little hiding spot to be blocked, though, so I tried calling him out, but he refused to get out. Seeing no way to actually get him out, I placed the washing machine back into its place. All I had to do was wait until the hunger or the need to piss would drive him to seek an exit. Well, the next day rolled by without any cause for help from my cat. On his 5th day of isolation, he started scraping against the back of the washing machine. Hearing the noise, I pulled it out again, but he ran back into the depths of his little cave. This time I kept the washing machine out. I knew he was going to come out sooner or later, and all I needed to do was make sure he couldn't hide under the sink again. Well, that night, he came out, completely silent though. I wouldn't have noticed if he hadn't scraped around in his litter box. Hearing that, I tiptoed my way towards the bathroom where he noticed me. He ran out, hoping to escape into his dark haven once again. Well, I knew it was a race I couldn't win. I called out to him, and he stopped moving. I started talking to him, and he just stared at me. Once I felt he was distracted enough, I came to him from the side and forced him to run into the guest room. At this point, I ran towards the kitchen and pushed the washing machine back into place. It was amusing to watch him try in vain to get into a tiny hole back to his hiding spot. Well, as annoying as the whole thing was, I was glad he didn't run away as I initially thought he would. Well, the next morning he seemed to be slowly acclimating to the new place. He walked around sniffing everything, examining it with his nose and eyes. Something was off about him, though. He didn't mind Jess. He always tried to push her away when she was too close, but I shrugged that off as being, well, stressed out for almost a week. I thought he must have just been a little off. The weirdness continued as he started cozying up to the dog, while she in turn started almost ignoring him. She just didn't pay any attention to him, nor got excited about his name being called as she had in the past. Now again, she's super friendly and loves all people and animals she comes across. Roach just kept running away from me whenever I tried approaching him. I thought he was just pissed at me for causing him this much anxiety, so I left him to his own devices. 2 weeks had gone by, and I noticed nature wasn't calling him. The litter box was clean. He was eating and drinking, but far less than usual. I rationalized it with his advancing age and the shift towards winter weather. He was acting normal for the most part, walking around, sniffing stuff, rolling on the beds and couches. He tried playing with a dog who didn't care for him. One thing that was off was how he wasn't meowing at all. Roach used to be a very vocal cat. Needs to take a shit, yelling in discomfort. Took the shit, singing opera in pleasure while running around. Once running tap water, meowing. Wants attention, meowing. Look at him in a way he doesn't like, meowing angrily. I dismissed everything as him having a feline midlife crisis or something. That is, until I saw him standing on his front legs with his hind half bent over his head yesterday. He caught sight of me staring at him like that and placed his hind legs onto the ground before sitting. I was shocked. Now, obviously I'd seen Roach standing on his hind legs before, but never on the front, and not bent in half like that. I came up to him and picked him up. I was surprised he even let me touch him, given his behavior in the previous weeks. I wasn't thrilled about the fact that he felt lighter than I'd remembered. Granted, he was never a heavy cat, but now he was way too light. Running my hand across his head, I realized that there was something different about Roach. His head was emptied. It barely hung onto the neck, and it just bobbed back and forth under the pressure of my hand. The skin of his face was stretched like a layer of paper over the empty skull, which I could feel in my fingers. A pit formed in my stomach. I didn't even know what to think. The head of my cat was virtually devoid of organs, but he was still functioning. I just held him in my arms and stared at his shriveled head. I guess I pulled on the top of his head a little too hard because his mouth opened seemingly involuntarily. Inside, I saw the bare skull of my cat, and an insect not too dissimilar from a praying mantis standing, vibrating its body. My stomach cramped. I felt like throwing up and just let go of the cat's body. Roach landed on his side, awkwardly before getting back up to his feet and running off. My cat was no more. Roach was gone. This wasn't a cat. It was a sick parody of my pet. A zombified puppet commandeered by some weird insect thing. I couldn't bring myself to hurt the thing. I wanted to, but I couldn't smash it with a baseball bat. I even brought it to the room the creature was lying in, but I wasn't able to do it. It just stared at me and didn't move. It didn't care. A chirping sound came out of its body, a poor attempt at purring. I felt sick and sad, and so I did the next best thing. Get this thing as far away from me as I could. I grabbed the creature and took it to my car. It didn't protest. It didn't even move. It just chirped, or whatever was inside its head chirped. Jessica seemed to be unconcerned with the whole thing. I took what remained of my cat and drove it to the nearby forest. He's never been outside, so he shouldn't have been able to come back, living, dead, or otherwise. The drive home was awful. I was confused, sad, and angry all at once. This insect thing, I just hoped my dog didn't catch any of that either. I had never seen such a thing before. I should definitely get an exterminator to make sure I have no more of these things crawling around somewhere. Last night, I went to bed depressed and worried, mostly about Jessica. Oh, she seems fine thus far. I hope she didn't contract whatever alien bug this was. This morning I woke up to something on my bed, something not very heavy. As I came to, chirping echoed in my ears, and the smell of spoiled eggs, milk, and fish hit my nostrils. My eyes shot open. I saw it walking around my bed. Instinctively, I kicked it as hard as I could off the bed, and it hit the floor with a sickening thud and struggled back to its feet. Something definitely snapped. How the fuck did this thing get back to the house? How did it get inside? My stomach knotted with disgust and anger. Jessica heard me yell and ran towards the room, but stopped at the doorstep, yelping before running away in defeat. This parody of a cat was clearly broken when I got up. It was trying to walk, but two of its legs and its back were out of place, so it stumbled awkwardly. I grabbed my blanket and wrapped it around this abomination before slamming it against the wall. The chirping died down, and I tied the blanket into a makeshift sack. I ended up tossing the blanket, with the remains of Roach wrapped inside it, outside. The smell of rot was unbearable, and the chirping's back now. I just want that god-awful sound to stop. Jessica won't come anywhere near that mess. I can only assume the smell or the sound hurt her. Ow. I'm pretty sure I saw that blanket move as I looked out of the window. I think I'm going to burn this mess. Just thinking about it makes my eyes well up. I'm sorry, Roach. I love you, you furry bastard. I stumbled across something at a party I shouldn't have. I'm not much of a party person. When I was in high school, I pictured myself going to frat parties and hooking up with guys, or something along the lines of that. Anyways, that's obviously not what happened. I study biomedical engineering at my university, which I'm not going to reveal the name of for privacy, and I'm much more of a homebody. However, Me and my friend Derek occasionally go to parties, and we play a silly game. In this game we play, we snoop around the frat, the sorority house, and try and find the most blackmail-worthy thing. Whoever finds the best, or worst, however you put it, well, whoever finds that item wins. This probably makes me sound like some snoopy, deranged psychopath. But, well, if it makes you feel any better, we usually return the evidence. But this time, I found something I regret finding. This time, we're at the Alpha Epsilon Pi House, at their annual welcoming party, or what Derek and I like to call the Let's Haze the Freshman party. I remember rummaging around a few rooms and finding a worn-down baby blanket. In another, I found a weird magazine. Not anything like Playboy. Something different. Let's just leave it at that. Anyways, I stopped in front of another door and read the "Stay Out" sign plastered on the door. I shrugged and entered the room, or at least I tried. The door was locked, so I held my ear against the door. There were no intimate noises coming from the room. Now, usually if a room was locked, I wouldn't go in. If someone's door's locked, that obviously means they have something rather private in there, right? But curiosity got the best of me. A locked door and a stay out sign. Well, I couldn't resist. This is where my handy lockpick, which was just a bent bobby pin, came in handy. After a few minutes of jiggling the bobby pin in the lock clicked. This room was surely a gold mine. I began searching around the room, and I'd found nothing that incriminating until I started opening the dresser drawers. At first, I found the usual: underwear, folded shirts, and jeans. Until I opened the bottom right drawer. I found some zip ties, a pocket knife, and a Polaroid camera. But the thing that caught most of my attention was the white shoebox with no brand name on the box, ominously placed in the corner of the drawer. Suspicious. I immediately grinned. Whatever was in this box was surely going to win the contest. What was in that box made me regret coming to this party, and made me regret inventing this stupid game altogether. I vividly remember opening the box and finding Polaroid pictures of women and children. Their naked, ghostly figures were splayed across what looked like the grounds of the forest. The autumn leaves that covered the ground were bloodied, the bodies were bruised, and their faces, oh my God, their faces. Their faces were stuck in a look of horror, a look of helplessness. I immediately dropped the box out of my hands and yelped out. Everything looked so real. It was different from the movies. I thought, if I ever came across a body, I'd be somewhat unfazed by the gore, due to the amount of horror movies I'd watched. But on that damn day, I was proven wrong. I felt all the alcohol I'd previously consumed threatened to release itself all over the carpeted bedroom. I began to sweat, and tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I remember recovering from what I'd just seen in a few minutes. I needed to report this to the police. I tried to gather most of the Polaroids without getting a glimpse of them. I stuffed them in my pocket and proceeded to leave the magazine and baby blanket inside of the room, and I immediately shuffled down the stairs. I didn't bother to tell Derek where I was going. I could tell him what happened later. I stepped out of the room and left, not bothering to take a good look around. Someone immediately lashed their hand around my arm. I looked up. It was a guy around my age. He was tall, with deep-set eyes and curly black hair. He was wearing a blue Alpha Epsilon Pi shirt.
I remember telling him that I probably wasn't his girlfriend or whoever he thought I was. That was until he lowered his head to my ear and huskily whispered, "You're a snoopy one, aren't you?" in my ear. I immediately remember thinking, "Run." I pulled my arm away with all the might I had. It was no use. I couldn't get out of his grasp. I immediately started yelping out excuses as I tried to wriggle out of his grip. But he looked unfazed. He started to pull me into his room. I screamed and shouted as loudly as I could, but the loud noises of the pop music and cheering blurred my screams for help. He threw me to the ground and quickly opened the bottom drawer and got a zip tie out. He proceeded to sit on top of my wriggling body and grab my left wrist. "This'll hurt less if you stay still," I remember him saying. He took my wrist and zip-tied it to the leg of his bed. He got up, and before leaving the room, he grinned and said, "I'll be back." After he closed the door, I immediately panicked. I'd seen tutorials on how to get out of a zip tie if both your hands are tied up, but I'd never seen one if your body was tied to something. I tried to squeeze my hands out of it, but it was no use. I looked around. The drawer which contained the pocket knife was still pulled out. If I could break the drawer out of the dresser, I could cut myself free. I immediately went to work, kicking the bottom of the drawer as hard as I could. One wheel of the dresser came unhinged, but the other hadn't yet, and he would come back at any minute. I sat up, making the plastic dig into my wrist. I scooted towards the drawer as far as I could and leaned forward. I hissed loudly. The zip tie was cutting off my circulation. I couldn't reach it. I sat back and rested for a moment, before taking one deep breath and scooching towards the drawer in one quick movement. I grabbed onto the edge of the drawer and pulled it towards me as hard as I could. The drawer made a loud popping noise as it came off of its hinges. I took the pocket knife out of the drawer and cut the zip tie. I sighed in relief. Now it was my turn to escape. I couldn't go out the front door of his room. I couldn't risk getting caught again. I looked at his window and stepped toward it. I opened and looked out. We were on the second floor of the house, but there was a part of the first floor that stuck out under the room. I started to cut the window screen hastily. I was about to climb out when the door opened again. A slew of curse words flowed through my brain all at once. I didn't even bother to look back. I climbed out of the window as fast as I could. My foot planted itself on the very top of the mini roof, or whatever you'd call it. Once I got both of my feet planted on the roof, I tried to climb down. The goddamn rain soiled my plans, and I slipped down the roof, falling onto the ground. My head was pounding at this point, and you can just guess who exited the building via the front door. I ran as fast as my body could manage, with my head pounding and my legs aching as much as they did. I ran into the wooded area, and my mind immediately went to the pictures I'd found just minutes before. Was I going to end up just like those poor people in those photos? The loud footsteps behind me only grew closer, and before I knew it, I'd been tackled to the ground. The man's curly hair hung in his face as he grinned widely. Was I going to be his next kill? He pressed his fingers into my neck. I don't usually strangle people, but I guess you're a good exception, he commented, rather nonchalantly. I quickly lifted my leg up and kicked him in the crotch. He hissed, and his grip loosened. This was my chance. I wriggled him off of me and stood up, kicking him as hard as I could in his sides. He yelped in pain as I got on top of him and pressed my fingers to his neck just as he'd done. Nothing was on my mind except the fact that I needed to press harder. I needed to kill this man. And I did. I screamed when I noticed he wasn't breathing anymore. I shook him. No, this couldn't be. I didn't kill him, did I? I started to weep when I noticed I had actually killed him for good. I didn't know what to do. So, I called Derek. He picked me up, along with the body. He freaked out, and he didn't stop when I told him the full story of what happened. What we ended up doing, after a lot of panicking, was driving to Home Depot and getting a cinder block along with some rope. The next day, Saturday, we drove to a lake a few hours away. In the wee hours of the morning, when no one would be awake, we tied the cinder block to the guy's ankles and dropped him into the lake. And that's the end. No one has found the body yet. A part of me doubts they ever will. Have the fish already eaten him up? And, well, if they did, and found me guilty, would my crimes be justified? Probably not. I live in constant paranoia because of this. My hands are shaking as I type. I don't have anything else to say at this point. Thank you for reading my story, I guess.
So yeah, I'm quite ill today, and you might be able to tell from these stories that my voice is extra ragged and rough around the edges. My apologies for that, but nothing stops me from making a video for you guys. So yeah, it is indeed my 5th anniversary, as of a few days ago actually, but typical me fashion, I completely forgot about it. So why not celebrate this evening? Hope you enjoyed those few stories. They were pretty insane, weren't they? What a weird and wonderful collection. Like I said, when I first started out, I intended to be like an audio version of The Twilight Zone. That kind of vibe, Very, very strange stories that would make you think a little bit. And I have moved away from that quite a lot, but still the thing that I really love the most. Well, here's to another 5 years. Whew, time flies when you're having fun. And it also flies when you're doing this. I'm joking, of course. Well, I'll be back again on Sunday. Bit of a treat for some of you, because the werewolves universe continues. That's right, the first Werewolves Are Assholes story in quite a while. Very excited about that. And that's going to be quite a bit of work as well. A huge bumper episode coming up for you all. If you're not into that series, or you haven't heard it so far, check it out. There's a playlist somewhere on the channel. I should dig it out and let you all find it, shouldn't I? Well, enough waffling for me. Only a 50-minute video for this evening, because I'm ill, like I said, but I can't let you down. I just can't. Well, till next time, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye, and here's to the next 5 years.